On the platform, we have three members of our church. We have many men and women we could have interviewed and touched on their career in the military, and all of them have wonderful testimonies for Jesus Christ. On another occasion, I would love to hear that part, and it will be interwoven with their experiences in the military. So let me introduce them to you. First of all, we have Major General Robert Worley. We have Sergeant Stephen Cunningham, and we have Captain Keith right here, Keith Carmichael, that we know. So I thought I would talk with them, and they're giving me the privilege to walk a little bit inside their life. You know, when we do that, I always say that you're walking on holy ground. Anybody shares with you their life, especially their military career, you're walking on holy ground. Most of you know Keith. He's our pastor on our West Campus. He was a captain in the Air Force. He graduated from A&M, part of the Corps, and immediately he went right in the military. And there Keith began a career that is indeed interesting. Keith, tell us where you began a little bit.
Well, you know, that was never really part of my plan, I'm going to be honest with you. But I got to A&M and got in the Corps, and crazy enough, I fell in love with it. I mean, it was just the lifestyle, the discipline, it's what I needed in my life. And so I decided to go into the military, in the Air Force. And so when I graduated and was commissioned, they needed maintenance officers. So I became a maintenance officer on B-52s and KC-135, so bombers and tanker aircraft. And I was a business major, so I had no engineering background, but that should make you feel really good. But I went to a military training facility or base in Illinois and spent 1 year intensively training on aircraft and aeronautic engineering. And so and then went to my first base at Barksdale Air Force Base in Shreveport, Louisiana.
Talk to me, Keith, about the thing I love for you to tell, and we need some interesting insight into you. You were responsible for the Alaska protection over there with the, tell us a little bit what happened in your career that I think is indeed frightening.
Yes, sir. Like I said, the military taught me a lot of things. It taught me discipline, organization, leadership, and attention to detail. And I struggled with that last one a little bit, which...
and you still do.
Yeah, so I appreciate that confirmation. So I was in charge of a unit, the KC-135s and B-52s, bombers and tankers. I had 638 men and women who worked for me, and but really on paper, they worked for me, but really I worked for them. And so then they were the true heroes, there's no doubt about it. And our job was very diverse, and it was daily changed, and it was always interesting. It was just always, you feel like you were right there. Things were always happening. But we were responsible for a task force all over the world, in the Middle East and in Asia, in Europe, and also here domestically in Alaska. And we would send KC-135s. That's really a flying gas station. That's what it really is. It just goes in the air and it refuels, air-to-air refueling. So we would send those to forward locations, and they would serve as the refueling aircraft for the fighters that were patrolling whatever area they were in. And so one of those was Alaska. And so we had a rotating task force there. We would send planes every 3 months, and they'd rotate in and out. The KC-135 is an interesting aircraft. It's very durable. You know, those planes are right now over 60 years old, 70 years old, really, 70 years old, and they're still in the military weapons that we still use, aircraft that we still use today. It's amazing. Your tax dollars have really gone a long way with those aircraft. But there were a lot of modifications, and it was always upgrading, trying to make sure those planes could meet the mission. But when they went to Alaska, they had special requirements that they had to have. Usually the KC-135 would take off, and they would inject water into the engine as it was going down the runway, and that would increase the thrust. It would increase the density of the air, which would increase the thrust of the engine. It would help it get off the ground quicker using less fuel. But when you go to Alaska, water's not your friend. It freezes. And so you had to have more fuel in order to get off the ground. So the airplane had to be weighted down with more fuel, almost 200,000 pounds of fuel when it went to Alaska. And to do that, you'd have to have a little brace. It was a little brace that was connected from the wing to the body, and that was one of the modifications you had to have. And so, but before an aircraft ever went off to one of those task force, it required my review of the records, which is a book about this thick. And you go through every page, and at the end, I sign off and saying, I sign off that this aircraft is ready to perform the mission it's been given. Keith E. Carmichael. I mean, just right there, big as day. And so we sent those planes off, and they landed. And about 2 o'clock that morning, my phone rang. I was at my apartment, and it was the executive officer for the wing commander. And he said, Lieutenant? I said, yes. He goes, the wing commander would like to visit with you right now. Like right now? Yes, like yesterday, right now. So I got dressed, and I knew a 2 o'clock morning phone call couldn't be a good thing. I did know that. And so I'm rushing onto the base, trying to get to the base from where I lived. And I knew it was really bad when I got to the base, and the security guards at the front gate didn't even stop me. They just saw me, and they were just like, go, 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 go. I went, oh, this is going to be really, really bad, because someone called ahead and told them to flag me through. So when I walked into the wing commander's office, all the deputy commanders of the wing were there, lieutenant colonels and the colonel. And I don't know, it was kind of like a death processional. I mean, I just kind of felt like a turkey feels at Thanksgiving, like someone's not going to come out real well here. And so I walked in, and I came to attention. I saluted the commander. His name was Colonel Mudd. That was his name. And he proceeded to tell me, while I stood at attention for the next 4 hours, from 2 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock in the morning, how I had messed up by sending a plane that did not have a modification, 2 planes that didn't have a modification, really, to be honest, that shut down that task force. So therefore, the surveillance and reconnaissance on the border of Russia and America was shut down for 12 hours. They had notified NORAD. He said, you know, they had to wake the president up and let him know. And then he said, you know, I've always wanted to meet the president. Never wanted to meet him that way, though. So on that day, he was Colonel Mudd, but my name was Mudd that day. Let me just assure you. So that's my story of not paying attention to details and learning a great lesson from that.
Goodness, Keith, we were all vulnerable because of you.
Yes, sir.
The worst thing about Keith, I'll make this brief, he ended up as a captain in the Air Force, and he was in charge of procurement at NASA. Everything he bought, everything that went up in space before he came on our staff and became a part of our ministerial staff. So you worry about outer space, it's his problem, I can tell you that. All right, Stephen talked to us a little bit. Stephen Cunningham was an E5 sergeant.
Yes, sir.
And you in the Army. We got 2 Air Force people here. We got somebody who really did the fighting out there, Stephen. Stephen, all of these are a member of our church, by the way. And Stephen enlisted in the Army, and he began to serve in how many deployments?
5.
And the deployment is, how long is a deployment?
Oh, for us at the time, it was a 90-day rotation. The 3 Ranger battalions would rotate.
And you were in Iraq and Afghanistan,
yes,
that's
sir.
right?
Yes, sir.
And you volunteered for something called RIP, is that right?
That's correct. Ranger
Tell us what
Indoctrination
RIP
program.
is.
Sure. It's the Ranger Indoctrination Program. Essentially, it's the only joint special operations unit that you can have the opportunity to join from the enlisted ranks as a private. So I'm completely out of place up here, branch of service and enlistment type. But I was given the opportunity. The attrition rate was pretty high, and my ignorance just pulled me through.
Right. How many start off in your training?
I believe
this
there
is
were-
like Ranger training.
Yes, sir. Yes,
All right.
sir.
How many started off?
There were over 300 in our
How many
class.
ended up?
63, maybe.
Yeah.
Six,
But you had an
mid-60s.
unusual assignment, did you not? Tell us about that
Yes, sir, I did.
unusual part.
My second combat deployment to Iraq in the fall, early winter of 2003, at that time we were in Baghdad, and in a typical rotation, we would 90-day rotation, roughly 80 missions, direct action combat missions, and our supposedly very last mission, mid-December, I believe the 12th maybe. The target was a bomb maker with ties to Saddam, and we executed the hit without much resistance. Intel was accurate, which is not always the case. He was there, and he was bad, and we got him. But
The bomb maker, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. So he subsequently gave up some more information, which in ultimately gave the command enough of authority to act on other intelligence that's been being gathered for months and months. At that time, we were operating on the deck of cards. Some of you might be familiar with that. It was all preceded by the ace of spades, which was Saddam. So that was the ultimate goal on every mission. And his credibility checked out. And as enlistment people do, we complained because that wasn't our last mission. We thought we were going home. We ended up doing one more, and that was the capture of Saddam. And from that point,
What was your role there? You were there when they pulled him.
Not directly there, but
surrounded.
on site. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And then following his capture, you had a role also.
I did have a role. So when we brought him back to the airport, Baghdad International Airport, there was a military side detention facility operated by the CIA that he was housed in, and I had two personal guard shifts with him.
So you guarded him.
Yes, sir. Personally, yes, sir.
Tell us what he was saying.
He wasn't allowed to do very much, but they would give him the opportunity to exercise, and that would be to pace back and forth on a concrete slab. But so he'd go from one room to the next, and every time he walked past me, he'd tell me it was no way to treat the president of a country. I was just thinking about when I could get to the gym.
Keith, your experience, you knew Christ then in your life?
Yes, sir. I did.
Strategic time, I know you lost a cousin.
Yes, sir. My cousin and I graduated. He graduated from the Citadel. I graduated from A&M, and we were commissioned on the same day. He went into the Army. I went into the Air Force, and so our careers kind of matched the timelines. I got out after 10 years, but he stayed in. He was a lifer. I knew that up front. He was going to be a lifer from the beginning, and he went into the Ranger program, was in special operations, and had really moved up the ranks. And once we had won or taken over control of the country in Iraq, he went in on the command structure, the command force there in Baghdad, and was in charge of intelligence operations and for the special ops. And so he was there working there in Baghdad. And Paul Wolfowitz, who was the Deputy Secretary of Defense, came into Iraq to visit the the command center there. And when they did, insurgents tried to assassinate him. And so they were in a conference room in a building there, and they had taken a break, and all the folks had left the conference room. And when that missile was launched, my cousin was still in that room, and he was killed in action. At the time, he was the highest ranking officer killed in combat at that time. Not true now, many higher ranking officers have been, but
So this is a special time for you.
it was. I went to the cemetery to the funeral at Arlington. I was there for that, and man, that's powerful. And
No question
you
about
stand there and you see these rolling hills, and you know, I've been there before, but I'd never been there for a funeral. That's a different deal, I think. And you, as you sit there and you watch that, it tells you freedom costs something.
Yeah.
And you realize just how much it costs when you stand there and you look out over that hill of all those who had died in service to our country.
Well,
It's a
that's what
powerful
we're doing
moment.
today. Now, Stephen, you didn't lose anybody in your troops while you were there, right?
No KIAs in my platoon. We lost several Rangers within the regiment and battalion throughout my time, but none directly
And
in
you
my
walked
platoon.
with Christ in those days?
Yes, sir.
General Worley has a phenomenal career. I don't know if I've ever read, we got this from unknown to you, I think, General, a career like I've not seen before on paper. It's an amazing thing. He's held numerous leadership positions leading military space operations to include intercontinental ballistic missile, satellite command control, space surveillance, missile warning, and satellite launch operations. Amazing. His decorations and military career is something like I've never seen before. He's a graduate of the Air Force Academy, got his master's degree, been to Harvard a couple of times. He has really been a major leader in the Air Force for many years. He was commander to the 30th Space Wing, director of the Western Test Range. He was director of Mission Support Headquarters Air Force, Patterson, director of Strategic Plans Program Analysis, Assessment, and Lessons Learned Headquarters Air Force Space Command. He has served as director and director of program, director of chief of staff of the Strategic Plans and Programs Headquarters in Washington. He has lived literally from Greenland all the way across, mostly in outer space, in prevention and protection and retaliation in his career. It is a phenomenal career, and he is an amazing man. Desert Shield, Desert Storm, Space Command. I mean, it's page after page of commanding positions, strategic positions. He is a scholar as well as a leader. And now, as he retired, he is executive director of the VA in the Houston area. But his most lofty position, all of this he's done, he now holds. He teaches a third grade Bible class in our church. Finally, he makes his way to the top of the ladder. General, talk a little bit. I know he's so modest. He's modest to a fault. I can tell you that. Talk a little bit about your career. You were brought up a military brat, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But you went to Air Force Academy, and then you proceeded. And tell us a little bit about what all of this means.
Well, I'd wanted to go to the Air Force Academy since middle school, and was ultimately able to get there. Following in my father's footsteps, I was an Air Force brat, as Dr. Young mentioned. He was a pilot, and so it was kind of, we were an Air Force family, and that's what we did. My sweetheart, who's sitting over there, I met in junior high school. Been married 44 years this coming Wednesday. I got that number down.
I'm glad you remembered that.
Her father also was a mentor to me as an Air Force officer and pilot of 30 years or so. So when I got into the Air Force, I wasn't pilot qualified. I would love to have flown in the Air Force, but my eyes were not up to par. So I did a couple of jobs in the Air Force that were not operationally oriented, and then ended up getting into the space business. And the first few jobs I had related to the global positioning system and the development and deployment of those satellites and the operation of those satellites. I was telling Dr. Young, not a lot of folks know that the Air Force built that system, deployed it, and is operating that system today free of charge for the world. And when your GPS takes you to the wrong place in this city, it's not the satellites, okay? It's your user equipment. So I just wanted to put that out there for you. But I couldn't have been blessed more in my career to have jobs like that. I spent a year in Thule, Greenland as the senior officer in command there, interacting with the Danish officers there and the Greenlandic people to do a missile warning and space surveillance mission. I met the Queen of Denmark while I was there. I never in my wildest dreams would have thought I'd have that opportunity, which is a lot better than meeting Saddam Hussein, probably. But it was just so many opportunities. The Lord led us to different assignments. We lived in 16, 17 different places. Our kids paid the price. The military families do pay a price for that. Moving all the time, different schools. The spouses should all get medals of honor for what they do supporting their military members. And so I ended up, I spent 4 of my assignments in the Air Force in the Pentagon, and I'm still seeking out therapy for that, but we'll leave that aside. But my last job, I was leading the budget development process for the entire Air Force, including space and flying operations and so forth. A very difficult but humbling job. And I was just blessed. 33 years. I couldn't have asked for more.
You were leading the budget for the Air Force. How many
Yes.
billion are we talking about, General?
At the time, it was about 120 to 130 billion a year. This was in.
And you drew up the budget. You were responsible for the budget.
I was responsible for coordinating all the efforts of people across the Air Force staff, 1-stars and senior executives, to basically put all the programs together, all the acquisition programs, the flying programs, how we were going to spend that $120 billion a year, about $600 billion across the 5-year plan. So that was my job, and doing that on behalf of the Chief of Staff and the Secretary of the Air Force.
Talk about the Space Force. You know, we hear about that politically. You think that's a legit need for us in America today?
Well, I'm completely biased, so I'll put that out there. But yes, I actually wrote a paper in one of my military schools when I was middle of my career about the establishment of a Space Force. And lots of people were talking about it, but it has now come to fruition. And I think the argument is, there's lots of arguments there for it, but to put a focus on space and the importance of space, we can't go to war without space. I think every service will attest to that. So much happens in space. GPS is just one thing. That's your positioning, but that's your precision weapons. Communications, we can't go to war without communication satellites that are orbiting our globe. Intelligence, we talk about intelligence. A lot of intelligence comes from space, weather information. There's a host of things, and really Desert Shield, Desert Storm was the first, quote, space war where GPS was used, even though it wasn't fully operational yet. And it's just gotten more and more since that time. So the establishment of a separate service on the model of the Marine Corps and the Navy is a great development, in my opinion.
We talked about this. I don't want to put you on the spot because I know you're limited in what you can say even today, but we're so concerned about security, space, nuclear weapons, etc. Can you say a word generally about that to give us some idea of assurance? Are we behind, ahead? I know that's a subjective answer.
True. I would say, and I did do one tour in nuclear missiles and ICBMs at Malmstrom Air Force Base, and I guess that experience, and again, this was many years ago, that experience only bolstered my confidence in the fact that we will know if we're under attack, and we will be able to respond if we need to. And thank the Lord that we haven't had to do that. You know, when you're sitting on nuclear alert, you don't want to have to do your job, right? But you're ready to do it if the president says so. So I think we're in pretty good shape. But you know,
That makes me feel better. I don't know about
thanks
you.
to the
I can tell you that.
and more importantly, I would add the men and women that are serving in our armed forces today are smarter. They're volunteers. They're highly capable, way better than probably my generation for sure. And that's where your confidence really should lie.
Amen. Amen. General, as you three men walk with Christ, he's a deacon in our church, incidentally. But you came up with a family that honored the Lord Jesus Christ. You married a wonderful Christian lady. Tell us about your dad, because that's an inspirational story, I think, for all of us.
Absolutely. I said we're an Air Force brat family. I was the youngest of 5 children. All my siblings are sisters, so I attribute all my character flaws to the fact I was raised with 4 girls. So I wasn't spoiled or anything, but I grew up with my father as my role model, obviously, and he joined the Army Air Corps in 1940. He flew in the North African campaign in fighter aircraft, P-40s, P-47s in North Africa. Then he went over to the to the Pacific Theater and fought in World War II over there. He also, fast forward a few years, 20 plus years, he served in Vietnam as well, and he rose to the rank of 2-star general. He went over in the summer of 1967, went over to Vietnam as the vice commander of 7th Air Force. The 7th Air Force was responsible for orchestrating the air operations in Vietnam. So he was the number 2 there, working for a 4-star general. But he loved to fly, and he also believed in setting an example for the people that he led. And so he flew combat missions over there, even as a 2-star general. And on July 23rd of 1968, about a month before he was to return home, we had our orders to go to Hawaii. He was getting a new job. I had already checked out my school. I was 12 years old at the time, getting ready to go into middle school. And he flew a reconnaissance mission in an RF-4 reconnaissance fighter jet, 2-seat kind of situation. And on their second path, with the cameras rolling, they were hit by ground fire. The procedure when that happens is to go over toward the coast and try to get back to the base, which they were trying to do, head south to get back to friendly territory. But the aircraft was on fire from underneath the cockpit where all the camera film was, all the way back, and it was getting unflyable, too hot in the cockpit. So they made the decision, he and his co-pilot made the decision to eject. In that aircraft, the back seat pilot has to eject first because they come out on an angle. So it's a select, you select and pull the handles and eject. So the back seater went. Unfortunately, my father didn't have the opportunity to eject with the fire that just swept over him in the cockpit, and he stayed in the aircraft until it impacted in the ground and was killed. It was a typical thing you see on television. 2 a.m, the chaplain, an officer, senior officer, knocks on the door and gives my mom the news. I was still living at home. Obviously, I was living at home. I was 12 at the time, but my sister, closest in age, was also there, and my other sisters had moved away. But so we got the news, and I struggled for a while. As a 12-year-old, that's the time you need your dad around, and so again, raised in the Episcopal Church and all that, but that wasn't helping me at the time. And then God brought into my life this girl that I met, the only girl that sent me a sympathy card after my dad died. And that relationship, that love that I had, and that direction I couldn't stand her getting better grades than me. So I started caring about things like school and what I was going to do with my life. And her influence ultimately got me thinking about the longer term. So when I decided to follow in my father's footsteps, try to be an officer, try to go to the Air Force Academy, and see what an Air Force career would be like. So that's.
And you became a Christian.
I became a Christian, well, when I spent 4 or 5 years striving to be the best student, the best athlete, and everything I could, but I didn't get into the Air Force Academy out of my high school graduation. I got a scholarship to this obscure prep school on the west coast of Oregon, where I met a pastor there by the name of Pastor John Slivkoff. I remember him to this day. I started going to his church and came to Christ through his leading to make a firm commitment and bring that into my life. And Lori and I were married after the Air Force Academy graduation, because you couldn't be married and be a student there. But I attribute that God-orchestrated sequence of events to bringing me to where I needed to be in my relationship with Christ.
Mm-hmm. Gentlemen, thank you. Thank you. Without anybody moving, would you bow your head for a moment, please? These men have lived amazing lives, but every life is amazing. And what makes life meaningful is the Lord Jesus Christ. If you're here today on this Memorial Day weekend, what a time to mark in your life a moment of memory that you can say, I heard the testimony in service. We sang patriotic hymns, remembered those who died, and also I remember now that the Son of God, Jesus Christ, died so that I may be forgiven, that I might be free. And so we want to celebrate today the fact that some will come forward to the balcony downstairs, choir, orchestra, and stand right in front of me and say, it was on Memorial Day that I sold out to Jesus Christ. I took off my old life and I put on Christ. Others here are Christians. You say it was a Memorial Day that I went forward and said, I want this church to be my church. I want to grow and mature here in the Lord Jesus Christ. So anyone who stands, we know you're coming forward into this family on this day of remembrance. As he leaves, no one moves except those who are standing, and come right down here and say, I'm coming home to Christ. I'm home to this church. As he speaks to your heart, you come.